They would like keep panning a camera over to, some roofer pounding nails, and they'd say things like, boy, you'd never, just from looking around here, you'd never know there was a recession going on.
Did you pay them extra to say that?
We fed them well.
Okay, so episode 36 of the Deal Ranch podcast. Matt Sloan, so president and CEO of DI Development Company. Thanks for hosting me here in the office. I know you got to tell me the story of what it was before. Amazing office, but super excited to hear the story from beginning to end of developing Daniel Island and Point Hope, which you guys are working on now. You're certainly a legendary developer, and Daniel Island made such a significant impact on this whole region itself, but excited to hear the story. So if you want to give a little intro on yourself, Matt, and then we can kind of get rolling.
Sure. I've been in Charleston since 1991. I'd moved here to work on the Daniel Island project. I was coming out of graduate school at Columbia and working for one of our professors there who was starting a real estate consultancy, and he needed some help, particularly on financial analyses.
Oh, wow.
And his specialty was the political environment of development, and his niche was, he was an ex-government official, and his niche was kind of helping landowners figure out how to navigate the governmental process, less about environmental approvals, more about public-private partnerships.
Wow. And
things like that. And what happened was I was working for him. One of my classmates was is part of the Guggenheim family, Solomon Guggenheim's great-grandson. And and he was on the board of one of their family foundations, of which there are several. So he was on the board of something called the Harry Frank Guggenheim Foundation. And then on New Year's Eve of 1991, Charleston had a long-term mayor in Joe Riley. And Mayor Riley saw the future that was going to, unfold here in Charleston with the Mark Clark Expressway, I-526, nearing completion. He annexed Daniel Island without consent. He had an emergency meeting of Charleston City Council. The legend is he did it on New Year's Eve, that he wanted the asset on the city's tax rolls for the year.
Got it.
And he called the head of the Harry Frank Guggenheim Foundation the next day and said, my name is Joe Riley. I'm the mayor of Charleston. You don't know me. I don't know you, but I've just annexed you into the city. And I know this is a shock, but I think it's the right thing for you. And I think after you do your analysis, you're going to be pleased that this has happened, that you're going to be part of our city. So what ended up happening was the consulting firm that I was with, it's now called HR&A Advisors, we got hired to figure out what the annexation meant. We were hired by my classmate, and he said, my family and my family's foundation has this property in Charleston. We were quietly minding our own business. We had a lease with a farmer. We were hunting and fishing and growing crop and managing a timber operation. But they had a cattle operation, and we said, we don't know anything about what the city of Charleston wants to do with us here. So we need you to evaluate, is this something that we fight? Is this something that we negotiate from? Is Charleston the right place for us, or should we be looking at other options like North Charleston or Mount Pleasant? Or should we incorporate ourselves into a town? These are all the scenarios that we put forth for them. Mm-hmm. And then we put boots on the ground here and did our due diligence and ruled out a lot of different things. North Charleston was a very different place back in 1991. They used to televise their city council meetings on a local access network, and it was not a stable environment. And Mount Pleasant was an attractive environment, but as soon as we started doing more research, what we quickly figured out is the city of Charleston, and in particular Mayor Riley, who is a gifted land planner. In his next life, he'll probably be a full-time land planner. He is the receiver of the Urban Land Institute's highest award, which is the J.C. Nichols Award.
Oh wow!
Which is it's set aside for visionaries. And he had a vision for what Daniel Island should be. And he said, and look, I'm willing to put my money where my mouth is. I know what I want this community to represent in the context of Metro Charleston. But let's face it, you don't have water, you don't have sewer, you don't have decent zoning. And so I'm going to help make all that happen. Let's work out this annexation agreement.
Wow.
And so that's how we got started.
And that was his Louisiana Purchase, I think.
You found that article?
I did. Yeah, I did.
Yeah, they called it Little Joe's Louisiana Purchase. I never had a chance to ask him. I keep hoping to run into him, but I never understood why he annexed it suddenly and without consent. Because I think if he had flown up to New York and met with the leadership at the Harry Guggenheim Foundation and laid out his case for support, I think everyone would have said, yeah, that sounds good. We should do that. And, but he did what he did, and it ended up being the right thing for not just us, but for the city of Charleston as well.
Wow.
So we got started in a consultancy role, and it grew from there.
And for sake of context, I would like you to clarify. So I think some bit of importance on, could you give just a brief overview maybe of the Guggenheim family, their significance obviously in the financial realm, but more importantly, how maybe Harry got involved in this tract of land so far down from New York to...
So the story goes, and it's been passed down, through generations, I guess, but Flagler built the railroad to Florida, and that was back in the day where wealthy northeastern industrialists had rail cars.
Right.
And the family, there were 7 Guggenheim brothers. 3 of them ended up buying plantation property in around this area, in the Low Country. They were introduced to this by Bernard Baruch, who has a rich history and quite a famous, prominent person, advisor to several presidents. And you drove past the Baruch property on your way here this morning. It's Brook Green Gardens at Hopkins Barony.
Wow. Okay.
So I think, in a casual way, they got introduced to plantation lifestyle here and recreational hunting through Baruch and acquired their own places. So Harry and his father, Daniel, that's not who Daniel Allen's named after, but it's just a coincidence. But they acquired Cainhoy plantation, which was at the time 16,000 acres in the late 1930s.
Oh, wow.
And then Daniel Island at the time, which is kind of just across the creek from what's now called, we now call it Point Hope, and I'll explain that later. But they had an opportunity, that property was owned by 7 commercial farming companies. And Harry Guggenheim was able to put it under single ownership for the first time in modern history. So he acquired that in the 1940s. And as it worked out, the Cainhoy plantation proper, which is now Point Hope, was a timber farm.
Got it.
So a lot of pine trees, 16,000 acres of pine trees, basically. Water around the edges. It's an enormous piece of property. But it was timber. So from a hunting standpoint, it was turkey hunting in the morning or quail hunting. It's set up great for that. Daniel Island was agrarian. So it was 4,000 acres of fields for the most part. So that gave him an opportunity to have an agricultural component to his holdings because they ran all of this as a business. So the north side of Daniel Island, where the Daniel Island Club is now, where our golf courses are, that was a cattle operation. And then the south side was a very active commercial farm that Harry Guggenheim owned. So it was a corn, wheat, soy. We grew cotton one year. So it was all producing cash crop.
Fascinating. So as an overview of what Daniel Island is today, and then we can get into the development journey and also when you moved down and how that kind of...
Yeah, I'll add one thing and you can figure out edits. So Harry, I guess back in Harry passed in the early 1970s. And I guess even back then, people were arguing about the completion, or in this case, the start of I-526.
Got it.
This has been going on for 50 years now. But it became clear that it was going to get built at some point. And he realized through advisors or on his own that, that was going to run straight through the middle of Daniel Island. The DOT was going to end up acquiring right-of-way. But wow, that property is going to go from being remote to being in the middle of things.
Okay.
So he had a vision that it would someday become an integral part of Charleston. So upon his passing, he had set up an entity called the Harry Frank Guggenheim Foundation, whose mission is studying the causes of violence and aggression in society. He's a fascinating guy. I can tell you more about it later. But he bequeathed Daniel Island, not Cainhoy Plantation, but Daniel Island to his foundation when he passed away in the early 1970s. So they were the original clients and original developers.
Yep, got it. And in looking at what it is today, so we can kind of show the contrast, how many homes, how many lots were sold, how many people live there as a byproduct of what your team developed? Like, so what is the overview of Daniel Island today as far as...
It's actually a very interesting story. So our zoning, which was very progressive at the time, we rewrote the city zoning code to meet our needs, and then we got it backed by a development agreement. It was the first development agreement ever done by the city, second only in the state. There was no enabling legislation for development agreements. So and it turned out to be Del Webb and Sun City Hilton Head, were the ones that got that through. But our zoning was meant to be designed along traditional development guidelines, not typical suburban. So we wrote a code using the lead firm was Cooper Robertson and Partners out of New York. Andres Dewani and Elizabeth Plater-Zyberg's firm was there as a subcontractor as well. We assembled an A-list of planners to do this. We never had a cap on our commercial development, which is interesting to me. So we could have built 100,000 square feet or 100 million square feet.
That's crazy.
And the city didn't press for it. They didn't press for it at Point Hope either, or at our Carnes Crossroads community. They all kind of said, I think the market will do what the market will do.
Yes, yeah.
But we had a residential cap, and I don't know if other developers that you've talked to or will talk to have been in the situation, but we were approved for 7,500 units. So that's single-family homes, condos, townhomes, rentals, basically anything that has a kitchen. And we finished at 7,499. And we actually had one of our developers that we sold to for a multifamily deal, as legend goes, had to knock a unit off of his project to stay, so the city could stay below the 7,500 cap.
That's hilarious.
So it's full now. Every unit has been spoken for. There's still a couple of things under construction, but they're nearing completion.
Wow. And going back in time, so you started as their foundation hires your team as advisors. At what point did you get shipped down to Charleston, and what was the early days like of deciding, hey, this is the highest and best use of the land is actually to develop it? So like jumping back into that.
Oh, it was always clear that the highest and best use was going to be development. The question was going to be what kind of development. And what ended up happening is our firm, after working out the annexation agreements with the city, and in particular the water and sewer agreements that brought water. Daniel Island has its own treatment plant, as an example. So once we worked that out, we met with the Guggenheim Foundation owners to go over next steps. And the next step was going to be to work on zoning. And we didn't want our zoning just driven by an entitlement, so getting a master plan prepared and approved. And we didn't want to just have a plan. We wanted to have a plan that was economically viable. So we had a nationwide search for a development team that would include planners, but there would be a developer person or a developer firm at the helm of it. Right. So there's somebody basically running pro formas while the planners are, drawing and thinking about, how to solve the world's problems. Somebody is in the room going, yeah, that sounds great, but it's not going to make any money. So yes, I know it'd be wonderful to have a botanical gardens here, but that doesn't pencil.
Doesn't work. Yeah.
So our story was we ended up picking a firm that myself and my employer had a relationship with. They're defunct now, but it was a Canadian-owned firm called Olympia in York. You could look them up. Back in the day, they were enormous. They developed Canary Wharf in London. Oh, wow. Which ultimately was their downfall. So we had hired them and worked with them to assemble a team of planners who I've already mentioned, and landscape architects and civil engineers and all of that. But then they imploded. Right when we were getting started on getting our master plan approved and through the process, they went bankrupt in some way, shape, or form.
So this was what year? 91?
93. So what ended up happening was we were overseeing that client relationship with Olympia, New York. Olympia, New York, implodes. Yeah. And my story is I ended up taking their place. So I went to work for the Guggenheim Foundation, the landowners in-house, and they said, get down there because this is a big thing. And, we can't have you just flying back and forth every week. And so that's how I ended up here. I assumed that responsibility of Olympia, New York. And then we were able to launch the development once our entitlements were all in place. Wow. We received our master plan approvals in 93, our environmental approvals in 94, and we broke ground in 95.
Wow. What was the evolution of the deal in the sense that they eventually get out of it or they sell the remaining land to you? So what were the first couple phases of development like?
Oh, that's actually, there's a bunch of good stories here now that I think about it. I don't get to do this every day, but so we took the head of the Guggenheim Foundation at the time, he's now passed away. And again, this is the Harry Frank Guggenheim Foundation. Yep. He was a PhD. His name was James Hester, Dr. Hester. He was the former president of NYU. So he was an academic. Wow. He didn't know anything about real estate. He was remotely curious. And I took him down to Hilton Head in the early 90s after we were getting our master plan done. Said, okay, we now get our approvals. It's time for us to do something. So we drove all up and down 278, and Hilton Head was a different place back then. But I remember taking him into Windmill Harbor, which is a lock harbor, and he thought that was pretty cool. And then took him to another place and took him, down to Sea Pines or whatever. And he goes, I got a question for you. Did these places make money? And the answer is no. I mean, none of the people who, maybe there's exceptions now, but back at that time, sure, none of the people who started projects were there at the end. It's usually the joke on Hilton Head. The joke on Hilton Head was it's the third guy that makes the money. And Dr. Hester said, well, here I'm the first guy, aren't I? And I said, yeah, you're the first guy. And he goes, well, then I'm not putting any money into this place. Okay. And he said, if the market, our foundation's not that big and we don't know real estate and we're not going to risk our endowment on something that we don't understand, any dollar we put into this is a dollar that we're not putting into our core mission of research. So we said, okay, then we need to find other money for you to put in, and we'll figure out some form of partnership structure. But it was right then that the naval base here in Charleston closed. So there was no ability to attract big institutional equity. Sure. And a lot of those equity sources don't like to play in 30-year master plan community world. Yeah. They like, as you know from your experience, they like shorter term horizons. Absolutely. We were in and out of one market cycle, not riding through multiple ones. Mm-hmm. So our first equity was, believe it or not, the owners of Piggly Wiggly.
Oh, that's cool.
It was a local family named Newton and Schools. That was the brother-in-law. And they had a little bit of a real estate fund that they used. They called it Greenbacks, which was the trading stamp that they used to give out if you ever shopped in Piggly Wiggly when you were a kid. And they played in subdivision development. And so we had land and we got a little capital out of them. And we structured a partnership called Scott Development. We did the first two neighborhoods with Piggly Wiggly's capital, got them out. But then what happened was we said, look, we're going to be here for 100 years unless we bring in more capital. Mm-hmm. And by that point in time, the Mark Clark was open. We had come close to plans to get our interchange built, which is on 526. And the shock of the naval base closure had eased because people said, what, Charleston's going to be okay. Yeah. So we went out looking for long-term patient capital. We had a series of suitors, but we ended up with the right solution for us. We were introduced to Crow Holdings, which is the real estate holding company for the Trammell Crow family. And they liked land back then. And we were introduced by my partner, Bob Faith, who's the founder and CEO of Graystar. He went to graduate school with the gentleman who was president of Crow Holdings at the time. And after us spending almost a year with another group and still not being able to get to a signed purchase and sale agreement, we worked out with Crow Holdings and with Bob, we worked out something over a long weekend and signed it. And I was like, wow, we've been working on this for a year. We did this in 3 days. And they said, look, we've probably overlooked things, so we're going to have to change this agreement over time as things evolve, but we're not going to spend pursuit costs here unless we have site control,
Sure.
which is a good rule. I still follow that rule to this day. I'm always amazed at how many people don't do that.
Yeah.
But we were their first investment in their, no, we weren't we were the first land investment in what they called Fund One, which is their first private equity fund. And now Lord knows how many dozen they've done since then. And they stayed with us all the way through. So we brought them in 1996, and we closed out that partnership with them about 3 years ago.
Oh, wow.
So we sold the last home sites that they were in on. They were not our partners on commercial. They were just our partners on the residential. Okay. So we put in about $20 million worth of land, and they put in $20 million worth of cash equity. And we used that. So instead of building one street at a time, because when we were operating without capital, we'd build one street, we'd sell 10 lots, and then we'd build another street, and just, it was, repeat.
Just all funded through cash flow of the project?
Yeah.
In the early days?
Yeah. And so what we were able to do is we got an upfront slug of capital from the Crow Holdings and related group. They had other partners with them as well. My partner, Ron Terwilliger, who was the CEO of Travel Crow Residential at the time, as well as Bob and his partners. But we were able to take that and put it all into the ground. So we built a lot with it. We opened up, instead of building one street at a time, we built entire neighborhoods.
And utilities too? Roads and utilities?
Yeah, we had favorable utility agreements. But yes, we basically build roads, water, sewer, landscape, prepared home sites for builders, started to sell home sites to individuals. We built the first golf course that we have. We built a small clubhouse to get us going. And then we started to market at a broader scale. We noticed that prices at Hilton Head were, but basically Charleston was very affordable then. And we noticed the prices at Hilton Head were almost double what they were here. And we're like, well, what's makes Hilton Head special? Why are they getting so much there? And, a lot of it was golf and access to the water. And we said, Charleston doesn't really have a high-end golf community. And we said, we can run with Hilton Head if we can put in the right amenity base. And then we started to lay out the strategic advantages of Charleston relative to Hilton Head. Like we said, they have an airport, but we have a better airport. They have some health care, but we have the Medical University of South Carolina here. They have some level of arts and culture. We have the Sloan Festival that was going to Hilton Head, and it was a lot of Northeastern relocation buyers. And we said, we can tap into that with Charleston as a backdrop. So we were able to create our own sales company at that point and start to reach out to market for buyers.
That was my next question. So at this time, you had early success just kind of funding it with your own cash flow or from the foundation, the initial part, the Piggly Wiggly JV. But then when you start to expand and you bring in Crow Holdings and
I missed a step.
Okay.
The way we got to, after we did the first two neighborhoods with the Piggly Wiggly group, the foundation decided that they needed to exit.
That's right.
They are a 501c3, so they're an Illinois monetary institution. Nonprofits, foundations can own land. You can buy land. You can sell land. But when you start cutting it up into 50-foot wide lots and selling it off to builders or to somebody moving here from the Northeast, the IRS starts to look at you and say, wait a minute, you're not being a foundation. You're acting like a real estate developer. And their tax attorney came down here and looked around at what we were doing and said, you guys have to stop. We have to get out of here. And we all said, well, we told you we were selling land. She said, I thought you'd be selling off, 500 acres at a time to 4 transactions to be out of here, but you're being a developer. So they needed to leave. And we asked my partner, Frank Brumley, and I said, well, we're running this deal for you. We've been doing well. And you guys have a vision for what you want this place to be. How about we take a first shot at buying this from you, and we'll continue on with the vision. And we were able to work that out. They hired another advisor to come in and oversee that process. We were able to make them an offer they liked. And so we bought them in 96. We leveraged everything we could in order to buy the property, but we had no money to develop at that point.
Right.
So that's, if you're editing this later, that's the segue to Crow Holdings. We went out looking for long-term patient equity, and we felt that being in a kind of a family-run environment, given that we were family-run here in Charleston, would be the right fit for us.
Interesting. What was it? You don't need to go over specific numbers, but what was the light structure of that JV with Crow Holdings? So like you guys are now, you and another partner to own the land, and then you need equity money to do the development.
It was a straight 50-50.
Oh, wow.
And Crow insisted on that. They didn't want to be 49.
Yeah.
And we didn't want them to be 51. So we did 50-50. We went almost 30 years in partnership together.
Wow.
We ended up being the last asset in their fund. We made all of our major decisions jointly. We never had a partnership dispute. And amazingly, we never had a capital call after the first one. And that deal for them, from an IRR standpoint, was incredibly good.
Has to be.
We had a couple of big sales, so we got their return of capital back a lot quicker than we thought.
And how long do you think?
I think we got their capital back in 2000. I think they were only out capital for 4 years or something, and then they got to, the president of Crow Holdings at the time said house money. He said, okay, now we're going to play with house money for the rest of this.
Wow.
But that does huge things for your yield curve.
No doubt. What was the state of supply and demand of single family homes back then in the 90s for this region? So there's a twofold question. You're having the success, you have a good partnership. Was there such a high demand for when you're selling the lots? Like people are nabbing them up pretty quickly. You're also doing this project over multiple different market cycles, so I'm sure it changed.
Yeah, we started selling to builders. And so that was hard. The first thing we need to do is line up production builders or volume builders. And the state of that, the building industry in Charleston back in the early 1990s is not like what it is now. There were very, very few. And we had design guidelines in place. We said, look, we're not going to use vinyl. We're going to use hardy plank, which now everybody uses hardy plank. But back then, nobody was using it.
Yeah.
We said, we're going to have crawl spaces. We're not going to do slab on grade. And they said, all the builders said, well, no, we like vinyl. We like slab on grade. We don't like these design guidelines. So we had a very, very hard time attracting initial builders. We were able to do so. There was a regional builder named Dobson Homes who ended up being acquired by D.R. Horton. I'd say a big game changer for us was when we connected with David Weekley Homes, who was looking to get into this market. And so they came in, it was very, very early, and they were amenable to all the things we were trying to do. And then the state of the custom home building industry then was also very, very small. But we were able to cobble together a small group of maybe 6 to get started with. I mean, at peak, we had 24 local builders, but we were able to cobble 5 or 6 together. We had to draw their house plans for them. We hired a firm in Atlanta to draw because they didn't understand what we wanted. And so these are, it's not pure custom home or like an individual hires an architect. It's more of a semi-custom. But we were able to put together a good group, and then we grew our builder team from there.
Wow. So then over time, did you ever sell lots in Daniel Island at all direct to home buyers?
Yeah, we morphed into that. When we got up into, first of all, when we got to waterfront, it didn't make sense to sell to builders.
Yeah.
They didn't want to pay for it. They wanted to reuse plans, and the plans aren't designed for a massive rear view out of looking over a river. But when we started to play in the golf club space, that whole market was really driven by sales to individuals. So we expanded our marketing efforts to reach deep into the Northeast and deep into the Mid-Atlantic region, which were our feeder states.
Wow. What do you think early on was the biggest challenge for the development in the early phase?
The early phase, the sales proposition was, boy, it feels like I'm in the middle of nowhere, but I'm still pretty close to things. And we said, well, that's fine for now, but we've got to change that. And we've got to basically earn the right to be kind of mentioned in the same sentence as other submarkets here. Sure. So, I live on James Island. Charleston's got Sullivan's Island. There's John's Island, the Isle of Palms. Mount Pleasant's a submarket. And so we said, we're never going to patent ourselves as a subdivision. instead of saying, I'm going to compete against this subdivision in Mount Pleasant, we said, we're just going to compete against all of Mount Pleasant. And that's easy to say, but it took years and years and years to be, we could talk the talk, but we couldn't walk the walk early on until we began to put some key components in place to where instead of people going, well, it feels like in the middle of nowhere, but I'm close to everything, it began to shift to where people started to go, well, this is the center of everything.
Yeah.
Which is what it is now. I mean,
for sure.
If you look at if you leave Daniel Island, you go in any direction, if you have a 2-income household and one spouse works, the north area, one spouse works downtown, we split the distance right down the middle. And we were able to use that argument to bring in some early adopters. The first one was Bishop England High School. And they were downtown. Their former campus was only on 4 acres, was on Calhoun Street. It's where the big library is right now for the College of Charleston. And we heard that they wanted to move and that the college had interest in buying it. And we went to them and said, look, we'll give you land for a campus. This will put us, on the map and it'll be good for you. And they said, you're crazy. I mean, nobody lives there. And they said, we're going to leave downtown. We know we need to. We need more space. They had no room for athletic fields or anything. And so we said, I get that we're brand new and there's not a lot of people living there, but let's get a map and look at where all your students are coming from. And at that point in time, only 10% of their students were downtown. They had a big chunk of students West Ashley, and they were starting to draw more from Mount Pleasant because Mount Pleasant was tiny then. But everyone saw that Mount Pleasant was going to explode. And then we said, okay, now let's connect the dots. And what's the most central location? And then we said, let's talk about where your faculty lives. And none of their faculty was living downtown. So we were able to convince them to come. And that very quickly put us on the map. So now we had an educational story, not a complete one, but over time we were able to make it into a complete educational story.
Yeah, that's a huge anchor to begin with. How were builders taking down lots? Like when you were developing a new phase or a new little neighborhood, were they giving a deposit and were they taking down 10 at a time or were people just buying one at a time? What was the sales plan?
The local builders were buying one at a time. And then we were never at a point where we had giant takedowns with the national builders.
Yeah.
It was largely driven by infrastructure. So we tried to do, and I think we still do this, and I think it's, why we're still here, is if we're going to spend $1 million to build a phase, I made that number up.
Yep.
But let's know that we have $1 million in sales lined up right. So that we can at least, when we get the phase done, we can recoup the capital and reinvest, and then we'll make our profit on the residual.
Wow. In looking back, and we can progress through the story now, but talking about different market cycles, whether it be 2008 or maybe .com bubble or because savings and loan would have been the same time you guys get started too, but how was the development impacted by different credit cycles? Like, was there ever a time where things got really tight at the end? I mean, it sounds like they got their money back.
Well, in the beginning, there was no capital in Charleston, which is why we ended up with a local group that I mentioned earlier, because of the naval base closure.
Right. And
then when so it was like a red X through Charleston. So nobody would look at us. But when that began to ease up, there's more people willing to look. We were very lucky. National Bank of South Carolina, which is now called Synovus, was our original banker, and they are still our banker today. Wow. And they were very, very good to us with loans, several non-recourse ones, and we got a non-recourse land loan out of them in 96, to acquire the property. You can't get those anymore.
No.
But the bank believed in us. They became one of our first stakeholders. They built a branch there before there was anything. We built it for them, put our offices above it. So we've had a very fortunate relationship with them. But the big awakening was in 2008 when the world stopped. 2008, 2009. We survived because we had always adopted a policy that we would not make any cash distributions to partners until all of our credit facilities were at zero. Wow. So, and we almost screwed this up. So right when the music stopped, we were sitting on zero debt, but we had also announced that we were going to expand our golf club in a very, very big way because we were overflowing in our original building. Mm-hmm. We said, we're not doing this right. And we had a scenario where we could have borrowed that money, but we didn't. We had a healthy conversation amongst our partners and Had we had borrowed at that point in time, we would have never been able to pay off our construction loan.
Wow.
So we rolled into the recession with enough cash reserves to take care of our existing commitments, including that very expensive one that I just mentioned, and no debt. But we were left with a lot of standing inventory. So then we had this long period of time where of our 24 local builders, all of them went under in some way, shape, or form.
No way.
Not a single one of them survives today in the form that they existed in back then. So we had no builders to buy from us. David Weekley entered the recession very, very strong, actually. He had just renewed his credit facilities, and he was starting to acquire. He was aggressive. He was acquiring regional builders around the country.
Wow.
And he's right now either the largest or the second largest privately owned home builder in the country. So they stayed with us during the recession. We had a couple of regional builders that we were able to kind of at least bring in some cash, but we had a whole bunch of home sites sitting around on the golf course. I think we were at 125 of them.
Wow.
And we'd just finished all the infrastructure to them, and there was nobody looking at those.
Were there any lots that builders had bought that just sat vacant? Where like they had this money? Yeah.
Yeah, but we were about. Did
you guys buy them back, or did David Weekley buy them from them cheap?
It depends on the opportunity, and there were some speculators out there, but for the most part, we were sitting on them. So what we had to do is we had to start subordinating lots to builders, which we had never done before. So just to get rooftops going.
So what did that look like? So they didn't buy it, you kind of just...
They bought it subject to a note, so we get paid on the back end.
When they sold it?
Yeah.
Consumer.
So we were at risk for it, and it's not like we had a lot of upside. Our upside was just getting paid for the land.
Yeah.
And we had to do this with some builders that, they were the builder of last resort. And because our core builder team was all dealing with their foreclosures and shutting their companies down, and it was a really dark, several years.
No kidding.
We had some good things happen to us
during that phase.
Well, yes. Like here's a good example. We I forgot what they call I think they called what used to be called the Nationwide Golf Tour. I think it's now called the Corn Ferry Tour.
Ferry, yeah.
So we not only landed a nationwide tour event, we landed their tour championship. So 25 guys got their PGA cards at the end of that championship, and people came in with their mom, their grandma, their high school football coach. But more importantly for us, we got 4 days of really flattering coverage on the Golf Channel, and those Golf Channel people were really, really good to us. We showed them, a lot of hospitality, and they were effusive in their praise of the community, but also in the amount of builder activity. They would keep panning a camera over to, some roofer pounding nails, and they'd say things like, "Boy, you'd never, just from looking around here, you'd never know there was a recession going on."
Did you pay them extra to say that?
We fed them well.
That's awesome. So what year was that, the tour championship down here? 9 or 10 or something like that?
I think so.
Wow. So you come through 2008. What's the journey to wrapping this project up? And then we can talk about what you did after that. But you have just a small inventory to sell through 2010 through
actually
when you're finished?
There's 30 lots that are waiting on pavement and a plat recording.
Okay.
They're there. That's in a different partnership from our one with the Trammell Crow or with Crow Holdings.
Mm-hmm.
So, and those seasoned nicely. There's a massive shortage of inventory around here.
Yeah.
So there wasn't really an urgency to that. Also, that partnership did not want to compete with our core partnership with Crow Holdings. So our deal was that we would wait until that one closed. So there's 30 lots left to buy. They're very, very high end. And our stuff wrapped up with selling off the remaining multifamily sites. We had an island that you probably drove past today, which we branded as something called Captain's Island.
Okay.
That was the final stage of the partnership with Crow Holdings. We had the name of the partnership doesn't matter, but we sold it out. We had a very, very successful launch, and we were able to close that partnership, and then now there's just residual cleanup things.
In wrapping up Daniel Island, you from just a developer's perspective, was there anything that you, not looking back in a what's the word, regretful way, but just in a learning's perspective, is there anything looking back that you think you would have liked to develop different, whether it be infrastructure, more commercial, different locations? Is there anything
I just talked about this or spoke about this at my Urban Land Institute Product Council last year, and we didn't control the commercial component. We controlled the land, but we were selling it off to, we weren't selling it off to big time players like Cousins Properties or the Related Group or something. We were selling it off sort of piecemeal without
to local commercial.
Yeah, and then our core shopping center, which was done reasonably well for the time, but now it's probably largely a teardown. I mean, the Publix that's on Day Island is being torn down right now.
Wow.
And redone, obviously. But if we had just like we brought in Crow Holdings to be our residential partner, if we turned back the hands of time, we needed the money, so we didn't really have the luxury of doing a long-term JV with a big retail developer, nor did we have the right Rolodex for that. Ironically, at this point in my career, I have that Rolodex and a number of people that we could have called.
But it's not 1993 anymore.
Yeah, and so anyway, we're trying to raise capital by selling to qualified developers, but not at scale. Now, if we had done everything in a cohesive manner. And so there's pros and cons to it. If we had done everything in a cohesive manner, we could have controlled tenant mix. We would have not have had the foreclosure, which is what happened to the developer who built our original shopping center there. But at the same time, the fact that it was built out by multiple parties, in a weird way, gives the community a little bit more diversity. Wow. It's not all designed by one firm.
That's right.
And managed by one firm and things like that. But I wish we had maintained more control of that.
That makes sense. Transitioning, and we can talk about Carnes and Point Hope now, but is there anything Daniel Island related that we missed in the story, development as a whole, just for that one segment in time there?
No, I don't think so. I made my comment earlier about trying to be recognized as a sub-market. And so when I look back on, and when the team of people here look back on our tenure there during our 30-something years of doing this, a lot of us were there the day we started. I'm one of the few people we meet that took from cradle to grave something of that scale. At my product council at ULI, we can't find anybody else that was dumb enough to stick around for 35 years. But I think that, the fact that I like how we are considered now. And when I meet people, and we just talk about Charleston, living here, there's so many new people here now, but the praise that they have for that community and the fact that they have no understanding of what it was, that it was cows in the 1990s, cows and corn, that's really rewarding. So I think that, that kind of closes that chapter.
I think so too. Well, it's an interesting chapter because you come down as a 26-year-old and then you develop an entire submarket of Charleston, and by the time that project's done, you're, a wildly successful developer.
Our company's been responsible for a lot of building permits between the Daniel Island project, which was 7,500 units, as I said, Carnes Crossroads, which actually doesn't have a density cap, but now that's being developed out by Lennar. We sold our interest there several years ago. And then the Point Hope community, which is approved for as many as 18,000. You add all that up, that's a lot of footprint here.
Which one do you want to talk about next? So Carnes, when did you get involved there, and where were you at in your own just business and development life where you wanted to start on another project? Because that obviously runs concurrent to while you're still involved at the time with Daniel Island.
So Carnes Crossroads, what wasn't called Carnes Crossroads at the time, that was a historic name, but it's not how the landowner referred to it. There was a landowner there who owned the property. He was represented by the commercial broker that represents us. So he was in our office all the time, and he had friends that lived on Daniel Island, and we got to talking. He's like, how come no other place in town is being built out with architectural standards? Why is every other place just builders doing whatever the heck they want without any controls? And so we said, well, this is sort of what we do. We work with the builders in a good way, but we say, these are the rules if you want to build here. It's quite commonplace now, but it wasn't, back then. And so he wanted to not just sell his property. He wanted to have an ongoing equity interest. So he wanted some cash up at closing.
Oh, wow.
And then he wanted to have a sizable partnership interest on an ongoing basis so there'd be more income stream. So all your money doesn't come at once. You have a giant tax bill.
Of course.
And he also had a pretty innovative tax strategy. So we partnered with him. We bought, I think we bought a 50% interest from him in a really bad time. I think it was 2006. And then the music stopped on us. And we had just put a whole lot of money into the ground. So we had no money coming in because we had projects that were not complete. So we had no real way to make money. Mm-hmm. So we basically had to put everything on ice for several years. And then...
and just pay property tax and keep everything afloat?
Cut the grass.
Yeah. Yeah.
That kind of thing. That community got hit hard. It's doing fine now. Mm-hmm. But we never really, when we came out of it, we didn't have the level of capital that we needed in order to take the place to its fullest potential. So we were building small phases when we really should have been building 200 lots at a time, because that market, that sub-market in the Goose Creek area was poised for velocity. I mean, our project is next to the Nexton community. Mm-hmm. When our marketing budget dried up, we said, well, we'll just call us Next to Nexton, which the Nexton people get a chuckle out of. But we were never able to ramp it up to that level. And the Lennar guys came in and said, it probably makes sense for us to come in here. Let's make you a fair offer. And then they've taken it to a whole new level. The amount of money that they and Freehold Capital have put in exceeds by far anything we could have done.
So they bought the remaining lots and land undeveloped?
They bought some of the lots were developed, I think, but most of it was undeveloped.
Wow.
But by that point in time, we'd brought in a private K through 12 school. We negotiated a public school that opened last year, I think. Yeah, last year. We had negotiated a supermarket deal with Publix, which is now underway. And we put a lot of the foundations into place.
In transitioning, do you want to talk about Point Hope a little bit too?
Sure. I mean, that's who's paying the bills right now.
That's right. So Point Hope, also a part of Harry Frank Guggenheim Foundation, right? That land. What was the origin of this? So we have the initial portion of Daniel Island. It's still on Daniel Island. It's just the top, right?
No, it's not the top. It's it's across Barrister Creek. It's the next exit over. It's on Clements Ferry Road, so it's the next exit over on 526. It's not owned by the Harry Frank Guggenheim Foundation.
Was it ever, or no?
No, he did not bequeath it to his foundation. It was owned by him.
Oh,
and now it's owned by. There are 4 owners. They're all intertwined. The primary owner on the stuff that's being developed right now is Guggenheim Partners out of New York and Chicago, so an international investment firm. Yeah. And then there's basically, for lack of a better term, 3 family trusts that are there. They're all managed by my classmate at Columbia. So he's the managing partner of all the entities, and then we all sort of move in sync. Okay. But each one has their own identity. We all have identical planned unit development ordinances, but each of the owners is free to do what they want. But for the moment, we're all moving in tandem.
Okay.
There, and so in any event, so that was owned by Harry Guggenheim. It's now in a trust for one of his heirs, and then different family trusts have acquired property, and then the core of the property was sold to Guggenheim Partners back in. I don't remember the year. Okay. I was not involved in that transaction, but that's our primary client right now. If there's development happening there, it's happening on the Guggenheim Partners property.
Okay. And when did you guys get started on this project? And were they just selling the land to you guys, and then you guys were developing and reaping proceeds, or how did the partnership work?
At the moment, we work on fee here. So my office that you're sitting in now is set up as a consultancy.
So they're still the landowner.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and our job is it's quite common in the industry. Our job is to make them money and do responsible development. The premise had always been that if Daniel Island was successful, at some point Daniel Island would be done or near done, and some of the value created on Daniel Island would carry over to the Cainhoy Peninsula, which is where this property is. And that's happened in a way that is probably twice what we ever expected. A lot of factors. The Daniel Island brand carries over, so it's the same management team. So we're proud of that. The Guggenheim brand is great. The Charleston brand is, peaking every year after year. And then we've get these gifts, like the town of Mount Pleasant passed yet another building moratorium. So, I know you live north of here, but if you're trying to move to Charleston now, it's hard to find things.
No doubt. So
we are this center of growth for the community. We phased out the name Cainhoy Plantation for two key reasons. One, Cainhoy Plantation resides on the Cainhoy Peninsula, which is an old, very, very old historic community. So we don't own that name. It belongs to others. And then secondly, everybody in our business is very, very few people who continue to use the term plantation.
Sure.
We're not building a plantation. We're converting a plantation into a master plan community. Builders don't even use the term master bedroom anymore. They don't even call it owner suites. It's now called primary suite. So the political correctness, is a real factor. So Point Hope is actually an island that's part of the land assemblage out on the Wando River. It's a beautiful piece of property. It's right there at the bottom of that map on the wall. And we centered it on that as a very good project name for us. Point implies water, and everybody could use hope.
Absolutely. So I read something somewhere, maybe it was a quote someone got you on, but it was something like, we don't want Point Hope. Point Hope is not to be Daniel Island 2.0. It's supposed to be the next generation. So it may be misquoting you, but it was something like that. With that in mind, what did you plan on doing different here, or what is the next generation? What is the vision for Point Hope as a whole? So
Daniel Island was meant to be very classical and traditional. I remember that's what Mayor Riley wanted there. He said, I don't want this to look like downtown. This is Daniel Island. He said, it shouldn't look like downtown Charleston, nor would it ever, but it needs to look like it belongs in the South, and it needs to have its roots from a southern small town experience. When we got to Point Hope, we pivoted a little bit, primarily due to our Guggenheim ownership. So, our clients there, their ancestors, built the museum in New York. I mean, they went out and hired Frank Lloyd Wright and gave him the largest architectural commission of his career.
It's crazy.
So they like things that lend themselves more towards contemporary. They went out and hired Frank Gehry to do the museum in Spain, which has completely changed that quadrant of northern Spain in Bilbao. So we came up with a vision statement that lent itself not to pure contemporary, but to contemporary expression. I mean, people still want homes that feel traditional on the inside. They still want a study in the dining room and a frog. But we're trying to push our architecture in a way that we never did on Daniel Island, and I think that shows. We use this term called coastal contemporary, which is kind of a made-up term. It means nothing, but it means it really means different things to different people.
What's it mean to you, or what does it mean in this context?
To me, it means like it belongs in the coastal plain here, so it doesn't look like it's contemporary in Palm Springs, California. It's not meant to look like a beach house per se, but it's meant to have those kind of expressions there, and that's an ongoing process, but people have embraced it. So we took a lot of the classical details on Daniel Island, like columns and portrayals, and said, how do we make these? I was in the Bahamas recently, and we were down the Abacos, and there's all sorts of really good coastal expressions down there. And so we've been looking at different things and then really trying to press our commercial developers as well.
To follow suit?
Yeah, we have two very rigorous sets of design guidelines, and by and large, particularly the multifamily guys, they really embrace this because they're sort of like, we've been building the same old, and we still need to have 275 units, and we still need to have an amenity, we still need to have a leasing office, but how can we make this a little bit more, not quite cutting edge, but something that looks like it's being built in the 2020s, not the 1990s.
That makes sense. So what is the status of this entire project and development as a whole? Like, how many homes are there now? How many lots are left to still build out? Like, what phase are you in? And
we're approved for 18,000 homes. We have 9,000 acres of property, so that's 2 homes per acre. But half of our 9,000 acres are wetlands, so they're protected. They're already been set aside. They've been dedicated to the Property Owner Association. They have restrictive covenant buffers all around them. They can't be touched. So half of the property will remain preserved. We got our federal 404 permit in 2022. Our mitigation for our wetland impacts ended up being a 650-acre nature conservancy, or nature sanctuary, I should say, that now has a conservation easement on it. It's the size of Sullivan's Island, so it's enormous. And it happens to be where we have species that are in danger. We have species of interest. Mm-hmm. This is the portion of the property that it has its own little unique ecosystem. So that's where the species like to be. So that's been put in a conservation easement with the Lord Berkeley Trust. That's the largest conservation easement ever in the history of the city.
Wow.
So we have right now, we have 2 established multifamily communities that are basically at full occupancy. We have a third one that's just starting lease up. We have 4 more that are in process. We just closed on the first of those 4 last week, actually. They're breaking ground now. Our single family, we're taking it to the next level. It's very hard to get approvals here these days. Mm-hmm. So we've been going a lot slower than we like, and we're caught in that rut of building small phases, but we're about to ramp that up. So that we've got, I think, 150 single family homes, more or less, complete now, but several more, another 120 easily in process, waiting on the city to record a plat. We're fully spoken for. All of our builders are sold out, so they're all waiting on inventory. We're working with a 3-builder team right now. So it's David Weekley Homes, who I mentioned earlier, Pulte Homes, and Toll Brothers. And we all play nice together. Mm-hmm. Everyone likes each other, and we all have a common goal. Rising tide kind of lifting all boats.
Absolutely.
In fact, Pulte, they're going to have 3 brands with us in another year and a half. They have their Pulte brand, which is the bigger brand. They have their Del Webb brand, mm-hmm. which is just breaking ground as we speak. That'll be the only Del Webb community within the city limits. And then their high-end brand is called Wieland, who was a regional builder out of Atlanta back in the day. They bought his company. Mm. So they're going to have a really strong offering of having something for everybody.
Sounds like it. What do you like most about working with them to having expanded to their different brands, Pulte? Like what attracted to you to these 3 builders for this whole development?
Well, first of all, we've got a track record with David Weekley that goes back to 1996, and we all understand each other. Toll, we got to know because they bought out a regional builder that had been working with us, that had a good record. So they absorbed that builder. And then Pulte had been building with us on Daniel Island, but not at this scale that we're going to be going at here. The Del Webb brand is a force of nature. Yeah. You live up by Myrtle Beach.
Yeah, there's one right next.
There's one by Grand Dunes there.
That's right.
So, and people
love it too.
Whatever, for every $1 we'll put into marketing, they'll probably put $3 in. Yeah. And they draw a lot of people, but a lot of people say, you know what, this is neat, but it's really not for me. Yeah. But then they're here on property, so we'll have other things to sell them.
Yeah, that's a good point.
They're a draw. Also, they're a huge economic development vehicle. So we're doing a very large transaction with a regional healthcare provider that I'm not supposed to name, but sure, it's going to be a huge boom for us. We're putting them right next to the Del Webb community. Sure. So we're putting them right next to a lot of people who are senior citizens who have health insurance.
Absolutely.
And it's a great fit.
Super efficient. A good reason for those people to move into that community.
But on top of that, we're doing a true seniors community. So you move to Del Webb, you need health care. We'll have this regional health care.
Del Webb is just 55 plus, just active adult?
Yeah, but 55 is a bit of a misnomer. The average age is a good bit higher than that. But one of the questions that Pulte calls them Del Webbers, one of the questions that a buyer would typically have is, okay, this is great. I'm very active now. But where do I go if I need more care? And so we have a full seniors complex that's getting ready to start construction next year. So it'll have different product offerings. Some of them will be cottages. So you're still somewhat independent, but you want to be closer to healthcare. You want to have a place to go get your prescriptions filled. Maybe you want to be on a meal plan. You want to be around other seniors. Then it morphs into assisted living, where you don't need the cottage anymore and you need more care. So now you're in kind of a mothership building.
Wow.
And then there's a skilled nursing on top of that. And then the last stage is memory care. And that's an enormous development that it's all fitting very well within the spectrum of the offerings that we have.
That's fascinating. In wrapping up, I have a handful of closing kind of questions for you too, but anything else Point Hope related to highlight as this is the main focus for the company right now?
It is all of our focus. Our permit has been appealed, so we are 2 years into a lawsuit to get that resolved.
Wow.
So that takes up a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
We're poised to be. We will be the best selling. Typically in our industry, they describe best selling as whoever sells the most units.
Sure.
But there's a bit of a misnomer to that, because if you're selling $200,000 units, you can sell. You can print them. I mean,
mm-hmm.
but if you define best selling as sort of a balance, how many do you sell, but what's the price point that you're playing at?
Right.
We will be the market leader in that context within a few years.
Regionally, you're saying?
Yes, within Metro Charleston for sure. A lot of it is being handed to us. Mount Pleasant still has their building permit moratorium. Lennar has a very, very fast selling community outside of Somerville that they're absolutely going gangbusters on.
Mm-hmm.
You might want to talk to them, by the way. I can connect you with them.
That'd be great.
They took a community that was started by West Vaco that was languishing, and they're doing 50 home sales a month there, which is unbelievable. But a lot of these communities are going to be selling out, and our location is just so good. We're this donut hole. We're the connection point between the city of Charleston and Mount Pleasant. We're bisected by a regional highway called Clements Ferry Road that is being widened as we speak. It's actually being completed as we speak. It'll be done in November. It took a 2-lane rural road. It's turned it into 4 lanes with a planted median. We have 15 commercial transactions on the books right now, starting to close. So we're going to be a little city within the city.
No kidding.
Out there. We are at the edge of the city's urban growth corridor. So again, we're this sort of donut hole waiting to be filled. Wow. And we're doing it in a really nice way. So our sales proposition there, when we got started, golf was not on anyone's radar because golf was in the dumpster.
Yeah.
Then COVID hit, and then golf went through the roof. I mean, the Dana Allen Club, which I helped build, we went from people being on a resign list to now we have a 4-year waiting list. And we attribute virtually all of that to COVID and this influx of people, or people saying, I just need to get out of the house and do something. So we didn't have golf in the plan there. But our plan there is, where else can you live inside a metro area, inside a city, because we're in the city of Charleston, and be in a community where half of the land is in permanent preservation? So the way to think about that community, Daniel Island had no wetlands, as an example. Mm-hmm. So Daniel Island just kind of goes on and on and on. It's a modified grid street layout. Mm-hmm. Point Hope has these large pockets of highland completely surrounded by wetlands. So your neighborhood's going to feel like a neighborhood that you might be used to. But if your friend or your kid's friend lives a neighborhood over, the way it'll go from neighborhood to neighborhood is through protected natural areas. And with 4,500 acres of that, and a good chunk of that being in a nature sanctuary, that's a pretty unique selling proposition for here.
Absolutely.
Daniel Island ended up with about just under 25 miles of trails. Point Hope, we lost track of how many are going to be there. It's probably 75.
75 miles?
Yeah. We're building on Clements Ferry Road right now. We're just starting on a 3-mile long linear park that'll be right up on the road with the buildings set behind it. It's a waterfront-oriented park, basically a necklace of stormwater retention ponds that are all connected, heavily landscaped, with trails all around them. That's going to be a regional destination for sure.
What's the importance to you in each community of preserving nature or having these active components, like besides just obviously developing and making money and turning lots? What things are important to you in each of these communities, or developing a master plan community? Well, like the trails you take great pride in, as you just alluded to. What else is important to you?
I think it's having residents that are very proud of their sense of place. We're hitting price points at Point Hope that we did not think we would get to for another 15 years. Oh. A lot of that is the market here is somewhat overheated, some would say. But we have a very good reputation in this community for doing what we say we're going to do. And if you look around coastal South Carolina, that's not always the case. There's a lot of projects that stumbled, or the developer pivoted and went in another direction. We sort of have an internal motto of under promise and over deliver, and build something where we have the long view. And we're very, very fortunate because, if we were owned by a private equity group, they'd be saying, get us out of here in 7 years. But we're able to take the long view because we've got patient ownership there. Now, Point Hope is going to go quicker than Daniel Island did, because we're doing some bulk sale. Like we did, the Del Webb transaction was a bulk sale to them, and they'll have 1,000 homes there. They're going to self-develop. And our business plan there is, we hired Robert Charles Lesser and Associates years ago to kind of give us a plan for how to bring this property to market in a successful way. And they said, look, unless you want to be here for 50 years or more, you got to kind of open up the market a little bit. You can't be all things to all people. We can't build $250,000 houses. Our site prep costs, don't allow that. Nobody can do it anymore for the most part. But they said you can't be all things to all people, but be as many things to as many people as you can. So that introduced the concept of like the bulk sale to Del Webb. That's not really going to be competitive. It's a complementary product, but it's not, truly competitive to our market rate offerings. We're doing 2 other large land sales with 2 other builders, one with Pulte and one with Ashton Woods. So that's going to accelerate the time frame. And then instead of doing these 30 lot phases, we're going to start delivering lots in 150 unit chunks. And that's when we will get to the next level with that project.
What do you think?
It's taken a while. I mean, I started, you asked about how long it's been. I started working on that for the different Guggenheim interests in 1999. No, not 99. In 2009. It took a very long time to get our planned unit development ordinance approved. We got that in 2014. And then we worked from 2014 on till 2022 to get our federal wetland impact permits.
Wow. What do you think, rough, barring market cycles, completion of the project or till total development? Another 5 to 7 years?
No, it's going to be more than that.
Okay.
It'll be over 10, probably 10 to 15. A lot of the property, it's not been decided what particularly the family trust, they have not yet told us what they want to do with it. We don't have infrastructure to their sites yet, so I don't know.
Wait and see kind of thing.
Yeah.
In wrapping up here, I got a couple of questions I want to ask you, but you have no shortage of great stories. Is there any? This isn't on your prep sheet either, but in looking back, is there any story, development story, deal story, or challenge that you think was significant, or just anything interesting that you didn't get to highlight as far as your entire development career, or any piece of the story, so to speak, that we may have missed along the way?
So up until recently, Daniel Island had 2 professional sports facilities, soccer and tennis. Soccer stadium has now been removed. The team moved to Mount Pleasant. But we were instrumental in helping bring professional soccer to Daniel Island. The team was playing down at Johnson Hagan Stadium, and we had sold the site off to the gentleman who founded a software company called Blackbaud, which is still based on Daniel Island. And soccer was his passion. He's a Brit, and he was very, very frustrated with his facility downtown. He said, the visiting teams won't come here anymore. There's no hot water in the locker rooms. They can't take a hot shower after the game, and they're riding by bus and they're driving back up to Raleigh-Durham. And he said, I've got this idea about building a stadium on the island. I have all these parking spots for my software company. Soccer games are nights and weekends, so the parking lot's empty. And he did. He went out and built an award-winning, it's such a shame that it's no longer there, but he built an award-winning, from a design standpoint, an award-winning facility, received accolades. He called and said, we need a pub. We have soccer, I'm British, we need a pub. And I said, we don't have one. Mm-hmm. So he modified his design and he put a full-bore English pub. His passion was collecting European Soccer League memorabilia. So he built this pub within the stadium called the Three Lions Pub, and he filled it with his memorabilia collection. So that was an interesting one. But the most interesting one is probably, we caught wind over 20 years ago that what was then called the Family Circle Cup women's tennis tournament which was being played at Hilton Head. It was usually the weekend after the Heritage Golf Tournament out at Sea Pines. We caught wind that they were not happy, that they needed to get out of there. They were playing in with temporary bleachers that all had to be set up. And as soon as the Heritage ended, they had to set up this little fake temporary tent city just to run their tennis tournament. And then they were always at risk that the PGA would move the Heritage 1 week forward, 1 week back. And it looked like they were on a collision course where the Heritage and the tennis were going to be at the same time. And on Hilton Head, golf wins out over tennis all day long. The Heritage is a far bigger economic impact. So we caught wind that they were frustrated, and we went and we were able to pitch them. And I was fortunate enough to be part of that team. And we kind of figured out that they would like to be in South Carolina, but they were looking at other places. Like I remember they were looking at Cincinnati. So we were able to put together a public-private partnership with the publishing company that owned Family Circle at the time, Berkeley County, City of Charleston, our company, and the state of South Carolina. And we all pitched in on a bond issue, got that stadium built in a very, very short time frame, and brought professional tennis here, which it's more than just tennis. That tournament is the oldest women's only event on the tour. And it draws an international audience, both in terms of spectators. It draws about 100,000 people, but it draws an international television audience. So that week of the year when the tennis is going on, the leads that come into our system, because we geo-track everything, we're getting them from countries that we've never really even heard of. So that was a giant thing for Charleston, and it continues to be so now. That stadium is now called Credit One Stadium. It's owned by a local philanthropist. And they have taken not just the tennis there to the next level, but the concerts to the next level there in a very, very big way.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
It was nice to be part of that back in the day.
I bet it was. In wrapping up, a couple questions for you. So what is the team focused on now? Obviously Point Hope, but is there anything outside of that? / where do you see the future of the company, maybe, or your own development interest after Point Hope? Is there any asset class, service, or market that you've not developed, been in, produced in, that you would like to at some point in time?
Well,
so kind of 2 or 3 questions.
I mean, if there were enough hours in the day, I've always wanted to be involved in urban redevelopment. So not greenfield development, but repurposing something. It's kind of why I bought this building we're sitting in. So on a personal level, that's something I would like to be doing, but it takes time. I've been pretty fortunate in that I've formed a good partnership with a Colorado-based company called East West Partners, who happens to have a local office here. And I, on Daigle Island, had very much wanted to build a waterfront village, and we were going to anchor it with the marina, and then the recession hit, and that all got put on ice in a big way. But we realized that we didn't have the resources to do that on our own. So we did a very nice and prosperous joint venture with East West Partners out there. It's right on the Wando River. We always wanted a waterfront restaurant, and we could never find an operator to come in and risk capital. So what East West was able to convince us is, if we're going to do this, we got to do it ourselves. Wow. So myself and several of the real estate developers own a beautiful restaurant on the water there. I wouldn't call us the greatest owners because none of us, it wasn't our passion.
What's it called?
It's called King's Tide.
King's Tide?
You'll be driving right by it on your way back up to Myrtle. But we anchored it with a marina concept that's there. We're going to add probably a hotel component to it. And then the primary business there is 300 very high-end condominium units. Built from concrete, steel, and impact glass. There's nothing like it being built in Charleston right now.
How many stories? How many floors will that condominium development be?
They're low rise. There's three, by and large, 3 stories. Wow. Over parking.
Very cool.
You should look at it. It's very coastal.
Well.
And I was also able, with East West Partners, to play a small role in redeveloping a old Masonic Lodge on King Street, which we just finished that a couple of weeks ago. It's on the corner of King and Wentworth. It was a building that had been boarded up for over 70 years. Had no windows. We put in a fantastic window package. It was only 12 units, but they're big units with 22-foot tall ceilings in some cases, and pretty special project to be involved with.
Absolutely. That reuse is really nice. Last question for you, Matt. You've worked with some amazing people, and you've mentioned a handful of them so far too. But who do you think in your career helped you along the way, or helped you the most? Who was impactful for you in your real estate development career?
I'm going to answer that question a little bit differently.
That's okay.
You had used the term mentor before we started. So I had two.
Yeah.
I'm sure I had many, but there were two that stand out to me. Neither of them were real estate people per se. But in our original partnership that bought Daniel Island, it was myself as kind of the worker bee, sweat equity partner, and then the Brumley family here locally, but also in Atlanta. And in Atlanta, the division of the family there are very, very well-known philanthropists. And my partner, George Brumley, who was one of the greatest men I've ever met, he was our partner on Daniel Island. He was sort of the social and moral conscious of things. For instance, we built and operated a preschool out there because he said, we need a preschool. I said, we don't know anything about preschools. And he said, actually, I do. He was the dean of pediatrics at Emory, and he said, I know all about early childhood development, and you figure out how to get it built, and I'll figure out how do we operate it. He was just the kindest person. We would leave a restaurant, and you'd be going, what happened to him? Where's George? And he'd be in the kitchen thanking the staff.
No way.
Which I've only seen one other person do that. It was former Governor Mark Sanford. But he, I think, was doing it because he knew there were voters in the kitchen.
Different reason.
Yeah. And then my second mentor is our law firm right now is called Wobble Bond Dickinson, but back in the day it was called Buse, Moore, Smythe and McGee. And when I got here, Harry Guggenheim's attorney was still around. He was still practicing, not as much, but he was still around. So his name was Henry Smythe, and when he got back from World War II. He basically inherited Harry Guggenheim as a client from his uncle, whose name was George Buse. This is sort of a legendary old Charlestonian family. And when I started to be sent down here, he carved out an office for me in their law firm. And I said, why am I in their law firm? He said, because I want to keep an eye on you. And he was a fantastic mentor to me on life in general, but sound business principles, things that I still use today. We finished a negotiation with a local utility, and we got pretty much everything we wanted, but there was one thing that I wanted, and we left it on the table. And I said, we could have gotten that. We had him where we wanted him. And he's like, no, you always leave a little sugar on the table because, we're gonna be seeing these people again. Right. It was just a series of things like that. I ended up living with his family with my wife in their kitchen house on Legree Street. He was just my best friend here in Charleston.
Wow. And he was significantly older too, you're saying?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he was in his early 80s then.
Wow.
In fact, there's a very large neighborhood, a very popular one on Daniel Island called Smythe Park, right off of Daniel Island Drive. It's where the public school is, and that's named after him. And there's a very nice bronze plaque on a stone there that kind of tells a little bit about him.
That's awesome.
So,
wow. I think that's a good place to wrap. What do you think?
Sounds good.
We missed?
I thank you for the experience.
Yeah,
I've never done something like this before, so it was. And I'm glad we're doing it on a Friday because
that's right. I'm easier to think.
I'm talked out.
Thanks for coming on, Matt. Appreciate it.
Thank you.